to look at the sad and dark legacy of residential schools and the important work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. To facilitate this discussion, we have two very important guests here at Mary Ward who will share with us their personal stories, Reverend Andrew Wesley and Miss Ester Wesley. But we'd first like to acknowledge the land we are on right now as the traditional land of the Mississauga of the Credit River and the Haudenosaunee people. Mary Ward High School was built on a site which once accommodated longhouses, indigenous communities, and trading routes. So history lives right here in our very own backyard, where we now participate in the annual Wolverine runs and where we celebrate Mass.
Just like many countries in the world, Canada has a history of colonization. And the people who were and still are colonized are the indigenous people of this land. First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people have felt the effects of racism through laws and social systems like education. This is what we are here to discuss today. We are honored to have Reverend Andrew Wesley and Miss Ester Wesley speak with us today. Reverend Wesley is a Cree from Fort Albany in Northern Ontario. At the age of 6, he was forced to attend a residential school where he remained for 11 years. He is now a respected elder who provides counseling at Toronto Council Fire Native Cultural Centre with the Diocese of Toronto's Urban Native Ministry Program. Ms. Ester Wesley is the coordinator of the Anglican Fund for Healing and Reconciliation, and she's an active ambassador for healing relationships between the Indigenous and non-Indigenous people in Canada. We are grateful for your presence here today, and as a token of our gratitude and as a sign of respect, we would like to give to you both a gift of tobacco, the traditional symbol of thanks, miigwech.
Thank you very much for the tobacco. Mache, all my relatives. It's good to be here this morning to be able to come and talk to you and share the stories of the residential school, of exactly what happened. And it's always good to hear the truth coming from a person that went to a residential school and have a life experience of exactly what happened. And also to hear from a person that did not go to residential school and be able to tell you the story, the impact of her family, that her siblings were taken away and to grow up alone in a community. So I'm very happy that my wife came with me to come and talk to you young people and to be able to shed light on what happened in residential school. Miigwech. So Esther is going to take over from him.
Good morning. My name is Esther, and I work for the Anglican Church of Canada at this national office. And I have been so blessed with this work because I get to travel across Canada and meet all sorts of people, from the far north to the Arctic, to from the Atlantic coast to the Pacific coast. So pretty well I have heard a whole slew of stories from different community members from different nations across Canada. Andrew and I have different histories. He went to residential school. I did not go to residential school, but later on taught in a residential school. His story, he will tell you what happened in a residential school. And first I'm going to tell you what happened in my family, what happened in my not going to residential school. I come from a large family, but all my sisters and brothers, they were all sent to residential school. Not by choice, but they were all sent to residential school. So out of 11 of us, 3 did not go to residential school, and I'm one of them. Basically, what happened in my lifetime as a child was I grew up in a community with no children. Imagine, you are in a community, and once all the children are picked up at the end of August, there are no children. It's silence, except for babies, the very young. But anybody that is 4 years old and older could be picked up and sent away. Do you know some people didn't even know their kids were being picked up? And the place I'm talking about is Northern Ontario in the far north. And the only way you can get there is by plane. An airplane during the summer and winter. And an airplane would come in the fall. There would be, what do you call them? The Mounties the Mounties police, they'd be in there. There would be some government agent people in there, and they would round up the children, and they'd be thrown on the plane. And there would be parents that didn't even know their kids were taken. Today you would call that kidnapping. But that was the practice in many, many communities. Even today, some of the pilots who were part of that are now beginning to talk about their experiences in picking up children and flying them out to wherever they were being sent to. Many cases, the parents didn't know where their kids were taken to. And so what I wanted to do is begin very briefly with the history of the residential school system in Canada. And then we'll move on to what reconciliation is all about. The first residential schools in Canada were established in 1620. They operated for about 9 years, and this was in Quebec. It didn't take off because it wasn't compulsory yet that children be placed in residential school. But the first school that opened in Ontario was in 1831 in Brantford, Ontario. That school closed in 1969. So when you think about from 1831 to 1969, how many generations of children, how many generations of families were institutionalized? From 1831, the last school that closed in Canada is 1996 in Saskatchewan. So we're looking at approximately 7 to 8 generations of people being institutionalized. When I say institutionalized, it's kind of hard to explain if anybody has never seen what life is like inside the institution. It's like you being here, but you have a freedom to move around. You have a schedule to follow, your own schedule. You can decide what courses you're going to take, study, but in a residential school system, it was not like that. You were From the time you get up, when you're going to brush your teeth, when you're going to go to the washroom, when you're going to eat, and for everything, the children were standing in line. The only time a child would have a little bit of freedom is during recess. They could run around, but in a gated area. Other than that, it was scheduled. You never had a chance. Everything you did was picked out. What you're going to wear, you never had to think about anything. Children and young people were not brought up to decide and make decisions of their own. Institutional life was so scheduled that children didn't learn how to do those things. It's like many people today describe it as being in prison. There are many stories that I've heard that people talk about abuse, and there are also many stories that people say they weren't abused physically, but the system began really in 1831, the first school that opened. By the mid-1850s, there was an assimilation program, assimilation of Aboriginal peoples. It became an official policy, meaning the assimilation policy said to educate the Indianness out of every child. That means whatever your background is, whatever your culture is, they wanted to remove that. So that the rest of the dominant, the children would only remember and learn the dominant society. That's all it was, nothing else. Their language was to be removed, their way of life, their way of thinking was to be removed. That's why they were removed from their families. Over time, from that 1850s, over time, more and more policies were added regarding the schools. At the top level of the school, there were over 130 schools across Canada, operated by 5 churches: Roman Catholic, Anglican, United Church, Presbyterian Church. And later on, much later on, like in the 60s, early 60s, the Mennonites got involved. The Mennonite Church got involved. Now, the Mennonite Church is the Ontario Mennonite Church that got involved. In so many instances, we have families that went from one school to another most of their lives, many of them at 5 years old, and would get out at 16 years old. So that would be their grandmothers went through the same thing, their parents went through the same thing, they went through the same thing, most likely their children went through the same thing. It became a way of life. It just became a way of life, because that was all. Many families, that's all they knew. And many could not survive outside the walls of those residential schools. Again, because they were not used to making any decisions. They weren't trained to make any decisions of their own. Like I said, the last school that closes in 1996, and that's not that long ago, and it was in Saskatchewan. It's not until around the mid-90s, well, the early 90s, I guess, that some of the former students began coming out in the open about the abuse. And there were a number of court cases across Canada, especially out in the western part of the country. BC had a lot of court cases. And most of these court cases, where they were suing the government for the experience, for the residential school experience, especially the abuse, the physical, or more like sexual abuse. There was a lot of sexual abuse. They start coming out. By the mid-90s, or later 90s, came out a class action suit. That's all the survivors across Canada. The class action suit was against the Canadian government, federal government, and the churches who ran the residential school. And it was launched by a group of people in Ontario. Many people, churches and government said, oh, there is no common experience in these class actions. It's not going to be certified. But lo and behold, there was a judge that found enough commonality in these cases. They began to recognize that this was going to become a class action. And 2005, the class action became certified. And in 2005, it was the spring of 2005, I remember that because the government people who were working on this, the lawyers, everybody just disappeared. The church leaders from these churches all disappeared into a closed room to come up with a settlement agreement. And so now we have the settlement agreement. It's coming to an end. And out of the settlement agreement came the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And out of that Truth and Reconciliation Commission, part of that is the reconciliation. And I'm going to let Andrew talk about the reconciliation. The reconciliation, as we understand it, is not only about Aboriginal people. It's not about one group of peoples in this country. It's all about us, every one of us in Canada. It is inclusive, where all peoples achieve their full potential and shared prosperity. Reconciliation means establishing a relationship between peoples. Like I said, not only Aboriginal peoples, it's about you. Establishing relationships with the rich diversity of this country. Canada is such a rich country in the sense of diversity. It is up to us in reconciliation to get to learn something about our backgrounds and to be proud of who we are, where you came from, what your cultural background is. It's also up to us to take the initiative to go and learn about the rich diversity of your neighbors, of your schoolmates. That's what reconciliation is. It extends far beyond the residential school system. It includes our whole country. And I'm going to let Andrew talk about his experience and then talk about the how he sees his work on the reconciliation.
I'm just going to talk about the impact of the residential school experience to the individual, the family, and the community. I was about 6 when I was taken away to residential school. We went by boat. And at that time it was called a fast boat. And we left 6 o'clock early in the morning, and we can get to where we were going about 9 o'clock in the evening. So it was about 15 hours we spent out in the sea from Fort Albany to Moosonee in Northern Ontario. I don't remember the trip because I was only a little guy then. But there were 12 of us, and I met with some of the students. There's only 3 of us left now that went on that trip, and we were talking about it. Anyway, when we got to the school, it was a strange, it was completely a different way of life as you enter the school. And many things happen in the school that you hear about, especially the abuse that took place. Excuse me. Those are real. They really happen. Because I myself faced a severe beating in school just for being a little boy. Just doing something that a little boy would do. When we were having dinner, and we were given our slice of bread. That's how we were given one each. And out of that little bread, while we're waiting for our meal, I carved a little gun. It's a little gun and the bread, so then I like that to my friend. At that time, we were told to be quiet while we were eating, so I got caught for just for being a little boy. And then I got beaten up just for that. I really got a good beating. And now it's just being a little boy. I didn't do any harm. All I do was just being creative, making a little gun out of a slice of bread. And that's just one example. That's just a light, severe beating I'm talking about. There are more severe beatings that happen in school. That we were considered them today criminal. I'll tell you just a quick one. One time there were 4 boys that went missing in the school I went to. And they ran away. That's what we were told. That's what the parents were told. That's what the community was told, that they ran away. And there used to be a big barn in the community I went to, the mission area, the mission quarters we call it. They used to have cows and all those things. And one time they decided to lift the foundation of the barn because we're getting rotten. They wanted to put the concrete. At the corner of one of the area of the barn, they found a set of bones. 4 set of bones. And those were the little boys that went missing. Did they really run away? And there are many stories like that. There's a special chapter in the residential school called the Missing Children. Those are the missing children. Some of them, the supervisors, the church, they don't even know where they buried them. And just imagine the impact of the parents, the grandparents, the extended family, of not knowing what happened to their children. That's just a very small portion of what I'm telling you because we don't have enough time. But that's the impact. Even today, we feel the impact with our intergenerational kids, my own kids. Because of what I brought in my heart, the anger that I have, I gave it to my children. And I have to teach them where that anger is coming from. It doesn't come from them, it came from me. I give it to you. And I got to tell them that. Tell them not to use it in a bad way. And that's what we're facing now because of the impact of the residential school we're facing it today. I just want to share that quickly because we're running out of time. Main question asked him, and thank you, Reverend. Thanks.
Justice Marie Sinclair said that reconciliation is about respect. Reverend and Miss Wesley, please know that the Mary Ward community respects you both for your strength and courage, and for your capacity to heal and forgive. We will continue to foster the truth about residential schools, and we will do all that we can to continue to learn and grow together. You have taught us a great deal today. We are humbled and we are grateful. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts for sharing with us. Magwitch.
We all know have the responsibility of continuing to learn the truth about the treatment of the indigenous people of this land. Let's come together as allies with First Nations people to cultivate healing and acceptance.